He had booked the private dining room at Hollingsworth and Crane 3 weeks in advance. That detail mattered, because it meant the ambush was deliberate. Callum Whitmore had chosen the restaurant, chosen the date, chosen the corner table facing the harbor. And then he had invited his lawyer, his financial advisor, and the woman he had been seeing for the past 8 months to sit beside him when his wife walked in. What he had not chosen and had not planned for was Sylvie. Sylvie Whitmore walked through the glass doors of that room carrying their daughter on her hip. 4 weeks old, wrapped in a cream flannel blanket, sleeping with the profound peace of someone who did not yet understand the world she had been born into. Sylvie's hair was still growing back from where it had thinned during the pregnancy. Her coat was the same gray wool one she had owned for 6 years. Her eyes were dry. Callum's lawyer stopped mid-sentence. The woman beside Callum, polished, composed, one hand resting lightly on his arm, slowly withdrew that hand. And Callum Whitmore, the man whose firm managed 11 properties across British Columbia, and whose name appeared on 3 provincial development boards, looked at his wife and his daughter, and for one unguarded moment forgot everything he had prepared to say. Please, before we go further, if this story moves you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Rich Secrets Revealed. It helps us bring you more stories like this one. Thank you. Now let's continue. Sylvie had not wanted to come. Her mother had called that morning and offered to attend in her place, as though grief and paperwork could be delegated. Her friend Una had said, "Take more time. You just gave birth. No settlement is worth your health." Even her lawyer, a quiet woman named Patricia Rowe, who wore sensible shoes and had the calm of someone who had seen everything twice, had said, "We can reschedule. The courts will understand." Sylvie had said no to all of them. Not because she was certain she could hold herself together. She was not certain of that at all. She had cried in the car on the way over, quietly, one hand on the handle above the door, the other resting against the infant carrier, where her daughter breathed in shallow, trusting rhythms. She had cried because she was still bleeding, because she had not slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch in 4 weeks, because the last time she had sat across a table from Callum, she had still believed, in some small and foolish corner of herself, that he might change his mind. He had not changed his mind. He had, instead, filed an amended petition that excluded the lake house in Kelowna from the shared asset disclosure. The lake house that she had found, that she had negotiated, that she had spent 3 weekends painting and repairing the dock on, while Callum attended conferences in cities she had memorized by his absence. The lake house that he had transferred 4 months ago, while she was in her 2nd trimester and still hoping, into a numbered holding company registered in Alberta. Patricia had found it, so Sylvie came. She settled into the chair across from her husband with her daughter against her chest, and she did not look at the woman beside him. Not yet. She looked at Patricia, who placed a folder on the table with the quiet precision of someone laying down a final card. Callum spoke first. His voice was careful, controlled. She had once loved the steadiness of his voice back when it felt like safety. Now it felt like rehearsal. "Sylvie." She did not answer. He tried again. "The baby." "She's 4 weeks, Sylvie said. "Her name is Willa." Something moved across his face. She did not allow herself to catalog it. "You didn't tell me she'd been born." Sylvie looked at him for the first time. "I sent a message." "You responded through your lawyer." Callum's jaw tightened. "That was procedure?" Patricia said pleasantly. "Yes, we noticed." The woman beside Callum, Sylvie had learned her name by accident, from a mutual friend who had not meant to let it slip, was called Renata. She was a landscape architect from Vancouver. She had worked on Callum's residential development in West Kelowna. She was elegant in the particular way of women who had learned early that elegance was a form of armor. And she sat very still now, watching Callum's face with an expression that Sylvie could not quite name. Callum's lawyer, a man with a gray tie and a grayer manner, cleared his throat. "We are here to review the terms of the proposed settlement. If there are preliminary matters." "There are," Patricia said. "Several." She opened the folder. The first document was the original purchase agreement for the Kelowna property, signed by both Callum and Sylvie, funded in part by the joint account they had opened when they married, and in part by an inheritance from Sylvie's grandmother that Sylvie had contributed deliberately, specifically, because the lake house was the place she had wanted to raise a family. The second document was the transfer notice, the numbered company, the Alberta registration. The third was an internal email from Callum's own development firm, copied inadvertently to a shared account that Sylvie still had access to, because Callum had forgotten she did, discussing the timing of the transfer in relation to the divorce filing. Keep it clean before her team reviews the marital inventory. Renata turned toward him very slowly. You told me it was a restructuring. Callum did not look at her. This isn't the conversation. You said she was contesting assets she had no claim to. Callum's voice dropped. Renata. She looked at Sylvie, then at the baby, then back at Callum. She told you she was pregnant when you filed. He said nothing. You told me she was lying, that the timing was manufactured. The gray-tied lawyer touched Callum's arm. I'd recommend. Callum shook his arm free. I said not now. Renata set her hands in her lap. Her face had changed. Not collapsed. She was too composed for that. But changed, the way a building changes in the seconds before you understand it is going to fall. Sylvie looked down at Willa. The baby's eyelids fluttered. Her mouth made a small, absent motion. Sylvie thought about the night she had found out she was pregnant. She had been standing in the bathroom of their house in North Vancouver, the one with the tiles she had chosen, and the garden she had planted, and the kitchen window that faced east so she could watch the light come in over the mountains every morning. She had looked at the test and her first feeling was joy, clean, unguarded, the kind of joy she had not felt in months, because the past year had been full of Callum's late returns and diverted questions, and the specific chill of a man who has already made a decision, but has not yet told you what it is. She had gone downstairs. Callum had been at the kitchen table with his laptop, and she had stood in the doorway and said his name. And when he looked up, she had said, I'm pregnant. He had not moved for a moment. Then he had closed the laptop. How far? 8 weeks. He had looked at her with something that was not joy and not anger. It was the look of a man doing calculations. That's not ideal timing, he had said. She still thought about those words. Not ideal timing, as though their child were a site survey, as though she had presented him with a scheduling conflict. 2 weeks later, he had filed for divorce. She had found out through a courier. An envelope left on the front step while she was weeding the front garden, still in her work gloves, still with dirt under her nails. She had stood on the path and read the first page, and then she had gone inside and sat on the kitchen floor. Her kitchen, the one with the east-facing window, and she had not cried. She had just sat there until the light shifted. She had not asked for the marriage she thought she had. She had simply, at some point, discovered it had never existed. Callum had come to that same firm 14 years ago, with a development company built on his father's reputation and 3 properties bleeding money. Sylvie had been a civil engineer working for a municipal planning office. They had met at a public hearing. She had been presenting a water management report. He had been opposing it for reasons related to a site he wanted rezoned. And afterward he had waited for her in the corridor and said, I don't usually agree with the opposition, but your data was better than ours. She had said, your data was aspirational at best. He had asked if she wanted coffee. She had made him better. Not in the soft, self-erasing way people meant when they said that about women who loved difficult men, practically better. She had looked at his balance sheets and found 4 redundancies. She had reviewed his permits and caught an error that would have cost him 2 years and a 7-figure fine. She had negotiated with the city planning board on his behalf when he was overseas and delivered a result that his own lawyers had called unlikely. She had also loved him, truly and without performance. On the evenings when the company was failing and he sat at the kitchen table unable to speak, she had not tried to fix it. She had made tea and put it in front of him and sat close enough that he knew he was not alone. Then the company stopped failing, and what she offered stopped being enough. Renata had appeared 2 years ago during the West Kelowna project. Sylvie had not suspected at first. She had been occupied, a major infrastructure contract, a pregnancy she had lost at 11 weeks, a grief that Callum had handled by working harder and talking less. It was only later, when a colleague mentioned seeing Callum at a restaurant in Whistler on his weekend he had claimed to be in Calgary, that she had begun to look. She had not needed to look long. The hotel receipts, The private calendar entries she found when he left his account open. The Christmas gift that appeared on their credit card statement. A bracelet, platinum and amber, that she had never received. She had confronted him in the living room on a Tuesday evening in October. She was 10 weeks pregnant and had not yet told him because she had been waiting for the right moment, and the right moment had begun to feel like it might never come. "Callum," she said, "tell me what is happening." He had stood near the window overlooking the inlet. The city lights were just beginning to appear across the water. He said, "I think we want different things now." She said, "You could have said that before." He looked at her with a pity that was more insulting than any anger could have been. "I didn't want to hurt you." She had not told him about the pregnancy that night. She had told him 3 weeks later by letter, because she needed a written record, and because she no longer trusted the conversations they had in rooms alone. He had responded through his lawyer to acknowledge receipt. That was the word they used, receipt, as though she had sent a parcel. In the Hollingsworth dining room, Patricia placed one more document on the table. Given that Mr. Whitmore's amended petition excluded a jointly acquired and jointly financed property, and that internal communications suggest this omission was deliberate and time to proceed full financial disclosure, we are prepared to file for emergency asset preservation if this settlement does not reflect a full accounting of marital property. We will also be requesting documentation on the numbered company's full holdings, as we have reason to believe the Kelowna property is not the only asset involved. Callum's lawyer began to speak. Callum cut him off. "Where did you get the email?" Patricia smiled faintly. "That is not your concern today," but Callum had already turned to look at Renata. Renata met his eyes. Her face was steady, in a way that meant something had settled in her. "Don't," Callum said. She looked away from him, toward the window, toward the harbor. The gray-tied lawyer called for a recess. Patricia agreed on the condition that the financial disclosure request be formally logged before anyone left the table. It was. Sylvie stepped into the corridor with Willa. Her legs felt unreliable. She found a bench near the windows at the end of the hall and sat with her daughter held against her chest, and she breathed, slowly, the way she had taught herself to breathe during the labor, when there had been no one beside her, just Una in the chair by the window, holding her hand and saying, "You can do this. You are doing this. Keep going." And the part of Sylvie that had spent 14 years adapting herself to a man who did not know how to stay, had finally, at 3 in the morning in a hospital room in North Vancouver, stopped waiting for him. She cried now, not loudly, not in a way that would draw attention from the suited assistants moving through the corridor. She cried the way women cry when they are exhausted past the point of pride, silently, without apology, with the specific grief of someone who had already done most of their mourning and was only now completing it. She cried for the version of herself that had believed loyalty was enough, for the kitchen with the east-facing window, for the baby she had lost 2 years ago and grieved mostly alone, for the woman who had stood in a public hearing at 32 years old and said, "Your data is aspirational at best," and had meant it as a challenge, not a prophecy. From down the corridor, Renata came to stand near the far wall. She had not planned to stop, it seemed. She stood for a moment looking at Sylvie, then looked away toward the glass. She had not always known. That was the thing she would carry later, the thing that would live in the recesses of her own reflection. Callum had told her Sylvie was someone who could not let go, that the marriage had curdled long before Renata arrived, that Sylvie was emotionally withholding and financially possessive and had never wanted the life Callum had built, only the stability it provided. Renata had believed this because she had wanted to, because it allowed her to love him without the inconvenience of guilt, because she was 38 years old and ambitious and certain that women like Sylvie, quiet, steady, not especially glamorous, simply could not hold the attention of men like Callum long term. It was not a kind thought. She had never examined it closely enough to know how unkind it was. She had begun to see differently the day Callum's assistant sent a meeting request to the wrong address and Renata had read, by accident, a message between Callum and his legal team. Do not surface the numbered company. If she finds it on her own, deny it was marital. She's distracted and she just had the baby. She won't have the resources to fight it properly. She's distracted. She won't have the resources. Renata had sat with that sense for 4 days. Then she had sent Sylvie an email from a private address. No subject line. Just the forwarded thread and 4 files she had quietly photographed from Callum's home office during a weekend she now understood had been offered to her as a management strategy. Here. Make sure your lawyer sees this. She had not signed her name. But she suspected Sylvie knew. That evening, Sylvie put Willa down in the portable crib in the 2nd bedroom of the apartment she had been renting since she left the house. A 3rd-floor walk-up in East Vancouver with old radiators and a deep bathtub, a deep phone, and a view of the alley that she had made pleasant with 2 pots of herbs on the sill. It was not what she had imagined. She had imagined the lake house. She had imagined Kelowna in the summers, her daughter running down the dock, the smell of pine and cold water. She still imagined it. She just no longer imagined Callum in it. Una came over with takeout from the Thai place 2 streets over. She sat on the floor with her back against the couch, while Sylvie nursed Willa in the armchair, and they talked about nothing important. A renovation Una was overseeing, a family of raccoons that had colonized the building's recycling bin. And Sylvie felt, for the first time that day, something that was not grief. Not quite peace, but the predecessor to it. Later, after Una left, Sylvie found a message on her phone from an unknown number. No greeting, just, "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about him. I'm willing to say so formally if it helps." She read it 3 times. Then another message arrived from a name she recognized. "I know I am not someone you owe anything to. I am not asking for that. But I thought you should know that what he said about you was not true. Any of it." Sylvie sat in the quiet of the apartment with Willa sleeping against her in the carrier, and the street sounds coming up through the window, and she thought, the truth took its time. But it arrived. 3 weeks later, Patricia filed the emergency motion. The court ordered full disclosure. An independent auditor reviewed the transfer of the Kelowna property, and 2 others, a commercial unit in Burnaby, and an interest in a land parcel on Vancouver Island that had been moved through the same numbered company in the same 12-month window. The audit findings were not sealed. The Globe covered it briefly. A regional business publication covered it more thoroughly. Callum Whitmore, whose firm had built its brand on integrity in land development, became a person whose name now appeared in a sentence alongside words like concealment and improper disclosure. 2 of his development partners requested early review of their joint agreements. The West Kelowna project stalled. He called Sylvie. She answered on speaker with Patricia in the room, because she had learned that documentation was the closest thing to safety she had. His voice was different from the one she had known. Not broken, tired Sylvie. She waited. "I need to see Willa. Willa is 4 weeks old. I know that. You chose not to meet her when she was born. You chose not to answer my message. You chose to leave that to a lawyer's silence." "I know," he said. "You don't get to arrive now because the situation has changed for you." "That's not," he stopped. "I'm not here because of the audit." His voice changed slightly. She heard something genuine beneath it, and she hated that she could still recognize what genuine sounded like when it came from him. "I'm here because I looked at a photograph. Una posted something. I saw Willa's face and His voice caught. Sylvie looked at Patricia. Patricia kept her expression neutral. "You can contact our office," Sylvie said, "to arrange supervised visitation." Elena? Her name, wrong name. He had said the wrong name. She let the silence hold it. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "Sylvie, I'm sorry." She ended the call. Later, she sat on the bathroom floor. The same bathroom where she had once knelt with a pregnancy test and felt something close to joy. And she thought about what it meant that he had said another woman's name. She thought about it without self-pity and without the particular anger that had sustained her through the first months. She thought about it the way you think about a diagnosis you have already adjusted to. This is what it was. This is what I was navigating. This is why the ground kept shifting. Karma did not arrive the way she had imagined it would. She had, at her lowest moments, imagined something dramatic. A public confrontation, a visible fall, the satisfaction of watching someone understand exactly what they had done. It did not come that way. It came as paperwork, as an auditor's report, as development partners who asked careful questions in boardrooms, as a reputation that had taken 15 years to build and was now being examined under a light that Callum had not anticipated and could not control. It came as Renata leaving, quietly, without a scene, moving her practice to a firm in Toronto. It came as the colleague who had sat on 2 of Callum's boards, resigning with a single-line note, "I don't believe the company's current governance reflects the standards I agreed to support." And it came, most completely, on the morning of the first supervised visit. Callum arrived at the Family Services Center in Burnaby 7 minutes early. He was wearing a jacket Sylvie did not recognize. He had bought new clothes, it seemed, in the way people sometimes do when they are trying to become someone different. And he looked less settled in himself than she had ever seen him, less certain. She had once found his certainty magnetic. She understood now that it had never been certainty. It had been the absence of doubt, which was a different thing entirely. The counselor nodded. Sylvie placed Willa in his arms. He froze. Willa looked up at him with the vague, unfocused attention of a 6-week-old encountering something new. Her hand opened and closed against his sleeve. "Hello," he said. His voice was barely sound. He looked at his daughter with an expression Sylvie had no name for. It was not the expression of a man who had won something. It was the expression of a man who had understood too slowly what he had almost made permanent. He held her carefully, uncertainly, as though he was afraid of doing it wrong. Sylvie looked away. She did not want to feel anything for him. She had earned the right not to, but grief is indifferent to what we have earned, and she felt something, not love, not forgiveness, not yet, but the distant recognition of the man she had once known, before he had chosen, repeatedly and with full understanding, to become someone else. She let herself feel it for exactly 1 moment. Then she turned her attention back to Willa. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in October, 11 months after Callum had filed. The courtroom was unremarkable. The language was formal. When the judge asked if both parties understood the terms, Sylvie said yes. Callum said yes after a pause that the court reporter did not record, but that Sylvie felt. The terms included the Kelowna Lake House, the Burnaby commercial unit, a child support arrangement, and a trust structured for Willa's education and security. It included a formal finding of improper disclosure that would remain on the public record. Outside the building, Callum stopped her. He did not reach for her. He had at some point in the past months learned that there were things he did not have the right to reach for. "The house," he said. "I know you wanted it for Willa. Yes, I should have remembered that." She looked at him. He had aged, she noticed, in a way that had nothing to do with years. She had seen this in her own mirror too, the particular settling that happens when you stop bracing against something. "I've been seeing someone," he said. "A therapist. I don't mean that as a bid for credit. I just wanted you to know that I'm taking it seriously." "Good," she said. "I'm sorry for the name." "On the call." She nodded once. "I don't have an explanation for that. I think I was trying to avoid what I had done, and I reached for. It doesn't matter. I'm sorry." She believed him. She was not sure what to do with that belief yet. "Willa has your eyes," she said, because it was true and because it was the most honest thing she could offer him. In that moment, he looked at her. His own eyes filled. "I know," he said. "I noticed. There's a photograph on the wall in the visitation room." He had seen it for the first time 3 weeks ago, she knew. A photo taken at 6 weeks, Willa looking directly into the camera, with an expression of mild accusation that Una had immediately said was very you. Sylvie had laughed. It was the first time she had laughed at something about Callum without the laugh tasting like grief. She turned to go. He said, "I want to be better, for her." She stopped. "Don't want it for her," she said. "Want it for yourself. That way it'll last." She did not wait to see if he understood. 6 months later, Sylvie drove up to Kelowna with Willa in the back seat and Una in the passenger seat, complaining cheerfully about the highway playlist. The lake appeared as they came around the bend above town, wide and blue-green in the late afternoon, the kind of blue that makes you understand why people fall in love with this part of the world. Sylvie pulled over without planning to. She just stopped the car. She sat there looking at it. "You okay?" Una said. "Better than okay." The lake house was in worse shape than she remembered. The dock needed replacing. One of the window frames had rotted and required immediate attention. The kitchen was original. Not charming original, just old. The garden was overgrown. Patricia had recommended a property manager. Sylvie hired one for 3 months. then took over herself. She spent the winter in North Vancouver. Her new apartment now, a proper one with 2 bedrooms and the east-facing window she had hunted for specifically, and drove up on long weekends with Una and Willa, and occasionally her mother, who had appointed herself Willa's primary source of loud opinions and soft blankets, and who seemed to regard the entire past year as evidence that her daughter had always had better judgment than the men in her life. "You were always too good at fixing things other people should fix themselves," her mother said once, on the porch of the lake house, watching Willa crawl toward a clump of grass with total determination. "Sylvie considered that, maybe," she said. "I don't do that anymore," her mother said. "I know, that's what I mean." By the time spring arrived, the dock had been rebuilt. The kitchen was in the process of becoming itself. Not the kitchen she had once imagined, but a better one, designed around the way she actually used space, rather than the way she had once believed she should. She had opened a private consulting practice, infrastructure and sustainable development planning, and taken on 2 clients in the Okanagan who had found her through a former colleague. Her name was beginning to mean something again. Not Mrs. Whitmore, not Callum's wife. Sylvie Beaumont, her name, her grandmother's name, the name she had put back on her work and her door and eventually, quietly, on herself. Callum continued to visit every fortnight. Always on time, always prepared in a way that suggested he had thought carefully about what Willa might need, which was the bare minimum, but also, for him, genuinely new. He brought practical things. Formula when she had mentioned running low. A book on infant development that he had annotated, slightly self-consciously, in the margins. He did not try to minimize what had happened. He did not try to reframe it, or revisit it, or suggest that the audit had been unfair. He showed up, and he was consistent, and consistency, she had learned, was not a small thing. She did not forgive him yet. She did not know if she would. Some damage is not something you forgive so much as something you find a way to carry at a manageable distance. But she no longer spent her mornings constructing arguments against him in her head. She no longer needed to. One afternoon in late summer, she found him sitting on the rebuilt dock with Willa on his lap, the 2 of them watching a pair of ducks move through the reeds near the far bank. Willa was 8 months old and had strong opinions about water and birds, and was currently expressing them through the kind of urgent pointing that suggests a baby believes adults are not paying nearly enough attention. Callum was pointing too, narrating in the low, patient voice she had not heard him use with anything in years. "That one, see? That's the mother. She's keeping everyone together." Willa said something insistent and possibly philosophical. Callum said, "You're right, actually. She's doing most of the work." Sylvie stood at the edge of the dock and did not announce herself. She watched her daughter point at ducks with her whole body, while her father narrated the scene in good faith, and she felt something settle in her chest that she did not try to name immediately. Later, after he had gone, she sat on the dock until the light went copper over the lake. She thought about what it had cost her to get here. Not just the legal fees and the sleepless nights and the months of nursing a newborn alone in an apartment where the radiators made noise, and she could not always remember if she had eaten. Not just the confrontation in the boardroom or the afternoon on the corridor bench when she had cried without sound. She thought about the earlier cost, the slower one. The years of making herself quieter to fill the space left by a man who was always becoming something that had less room for her. The years of treating the diminishment as a temporary condition, something to wait out, something patience would eventually correct. Patience is not a flaw, she had decided, but it can become one if you apply it to the wrong things. She had spent it on the wrong thing for too long. She was spending it now on the right ones, on her daughter, on the lake house, on the practice, on the east-facing window that caught the morning light and the dock that she had rebuilt from its rotten foundation. On herself, a heron landed at the far edge of the water, stood still as a sentence, then lifted again into the pale evening sky. Sylvie watched it go. She was not the woman who had arrived at that boardroom, desperate for him to see what she had lost. She was not the woman who had stood on the front path in her garden gloves and read a courier envelope and felt the floor leave. She was not even quite the woman who had sat across that glass table with her newborn daughter against her chest and felt the particular cold fury of someone who understands they are not being betrayed, because the betrayal was already finished. But seen. She was Sylvie Beaumont. She had rebuilt a dock. She had rebuilt a practice. She had rebuilt the version of herself that existed before she had learned to make herself smaller. Her daughter would know all of this one day, not the version where her mother was a victim, or a saint, or a warning, just the version where a woman decided what she was worth and went about proving it quietly, in the way that lasts. The lake held the last of the light a little longer than the sky did. Sylvie stayed until it was gone, and then she went back inside to where her daughter was waiting.